Hello and welcome to Failure and Analysis. My name is Kevin Jordan, and we're back with another reaction Andy. We're going to watch Asmongold sit in his treehouse and talk about his honest thoughts about the state of Shadowlands. Let's dive in. Be honest, Asmongold, be honest.
Hey guys, it's me again, and I haven't made a video on this channel for a while, and I recently watched the interview with Ian that preached it. Huge shout out to both of them for doing that and making that possible, and it really kind of inspired me to make this video, and I want to do this a little bit different than the way I've done many of my other videos, even on this channel. I don't want to do this video as Asmongold. I don't want to do this video as Zach Rar. I want to do this video as just simply a guy who's played WoW for the past 15 years, and I just kind of want to share my thoughts without a whole lot of showmanship or anything. I just kind of want to talk about how I feel. I think that this is a really good time to do that, and I feel like it's something that's necessary. So anyway, I watched the interview with Preach and Ian, and half of the answers that Ian gave were okay, and the other half were not. I think that probably if I had to think of a word to describe the interview at all, the word would be disappointing. Now, the reason why I think it's disappointing is the fact that I feel like the WoW team as a whole has kind of gone down this path in probably like the last 5 years of developing systems and then putting those systems into the game, iterating on the systems throughout the expansion, and then once the expansion is finished, the system is in somewhat of a completed state, and then the system's removed and then replaced with a new system for the next expansion, and the cycle repeats itself. And I think that we've seen this happen with Legion Legendaries, we've seen this happen with Azerite armor, we've seen it happen with Corruptions, we've seen it happen now again with Anima, with the changes that people had suggested in beta are now finally being implemented into the 0.1 and most likely the 0.2 patch, and also we're seeing them with tier sets and a number of other things as well. And I think that the first point that I want to actually talk about is tier sets. Ian announced that tier sets are coming back into the game, and they're going to be being added back into the game in 9.2, which is going to be, I'm assuming, the third raid in Shadowlands. I think this is a good thing, but I think that people's optimism and happiness is a bit misguided. This is something that we've had in the game for 15 years.
Uh-oh. Misguided optimism. But yeah, that's a good point, right? Like, you guys are super happy. Is everyone super happy they're back when they probably shouldn't have ever been removed in the first place?
It was removed without a whole lot of rationality or logic behind it, and now we're having it added back into the game, and people are celebrating it like it's a win. I think that obviously I appreciate them listening to feedback, but I'd like to get to a point to where we can move beyond getting things back that we already had. I think that's not good for the game at all. Just continuously having this basically platter of activities and abilities that players have, and then every expansion there's 8 things on the platter, Blizzard takes 5 off, and then people get excited when they get the next 3 back again. It's just not really exciting. Or
Can I get the filet mignon bites to come back around again? Because I am sick of these mushrooms, okay? These mushrooms and scallops, come on. Just bring the goddamn filet bites around again, you know what I mean?
innovative or interesting or fun. I don't like it at all. And as excited as I am about tier sets, there's a certain degree of resentment that I see whenever the community applauds something that to me seems like something that should have never happened in the first place. And on top of that, it's something that should have been added in the first tier. And I think that this is actually a greater, bigger issue, which is the complacency of not only the developers, but also the players. I think the players have become much too complacent and much too accepting of very clear problems that the game has, and people have been completely okay with saying, oh, well, they'll fix it in X patch, or they'll fix it in Y patch, or in the future, or I'm sure by next expansion they'll have it hammered out. I don't think that we should accept those types of answers, especially whenever it's things that actively make the game worse, and the solution to those things is fairly evident. I think that back in Legion, for example, and I don't really want to talk a whole lot about previous expansions, but I have to give these examples in order to establish a certain degree of a pattern here. So in Legion, people asked ever since the very beginning of the alpha in Legion, and then also the beta in Legion, for there to be not only targetable legendaries that you can work towards as your class, but also on top of that, for you to be able to have some sort of a resource that you can actively farm and you can actively work towards in order to get those legendaries and not just completely leave it up to luck. That was a change that people wanted and something people wanted out of the system ever since basically before the game even came out, and it didn't happen until 7.3 or 7.35. And that's like a 1.5 year difference that it took for a suggestion that happened in alpha to make it into the main game. And I think that if you were to ask anybody during Tomb of Sargeras or during Nighthold or Trial of Valor how they felt about legendaries, I think that many people would have thought that they were good items and they were fun to use, but the acquisition method was bad. Why is it that we have to sit around and wait for sometimes years in order for something that seems like an obvious decision that oftentimes ends up happening be added into the game? And I think that another example of this is Anima, and there's another example too, which is Corruptions, and this happened in BFA. And it's an ongoing pattern that Blizzard has continuously gone down, which is they will introduce a system into the game, and the system will be incomplete or broken or some way dysfunctional in a way that's actually fairly evident. Like, for example, the corruptions. You can't corrupt your gear, and the corruptions are massively game-defining and meta-defining, and there's no way for you to choose which ones you get. You just have to randomly get them, and, it is what it is. Now...
Yeah, this is such an interesting topic. Like, players, kind of coming together, even when you can form a consensus of any kind, and saying, we want this, right? It's not always good for the game. The things people want isn't always good for the game. So there's multiple reasons why it might take time. It could take implementation time, obviously. Even if they like the idea, it could also be they don't want to do it for a variety of reasons. But eventually the community wears them down. So they end up adding it, after a year of being badgered. But yeah, I'm trying to put myself in the place of, like basically telling the community, no, we're not going to do that, even though they've, come together in some form of consensus, because I believe it's harmful for the game. I don't actually think the developers play that card very often. You could argue they did that with covenants, right? You could say that they went against the community consensus that covenant abilities and forcing people to choose was not something anybody wanted, and they did it anyway. But I don't see a lot of evidence of that card being played. Very, historically, I see more of it as them bending the knee, right, to the community. So, but it is interesting that he talks about the time it takes for them to, like the start of it, which is the start of the implementation, which he says is flawed or broken, and then it gets fixed it becomes the community version by the end of the patch cycle, right? Definitely an interesting thing to point out is cyclical, right? And again, that can be for a number of reasons. It could be they implemented the system they believed in, and then they changed it to one the community wanted instead over time. and you can come up with reasons why. It could be crowd pleasing. It could be they just got worn out, tired of defending their design decisions. When I say crowd pleasing, I mean like intentionally crowd pleasing, like, oh, they put it in terrible on purpose so that they could then gain brownie points with the community by fixing it up. Or you could say that they put in a system they didn't really understand and thought it would be fun, but the classic versions of like, oh, they're out of touch, or whatever, and then saw how people reacted to it and decided to change it. Yeah, it's a interesting thing to point out, though, how cyclical that pattern is, and obviously very bad for the game.
I think that no player really wants to have a system like that. I think that something like that works just fine in a game like Diablo, or a game like Path of Exile even, where to some degree you're not really playing with other people, and so you don't have to actively compete with them for different things. You can just, sometimes you grind and you get one good item or you get another good item, but you don't get every good item all the time. And I think that for an ARPG or something like that, it works just fine. But I think that this has been another kind of meta pattern that Blizzard has taken, is that I feel like a lot of the Blizzard developers genuinely do not play World of Warcraft the same way that their players do. And I think that's evident by the amount of changes that the developers add into the game. They're either changes that have been asked for by the very highest degree of PvP players or PvE players, because those are the people who have the ear of the developers, or on the other side, changes that are just completely antithetical to what an MMO is supposed to be. Things like Titan Forging, or things like the random Legion legendary system, or corruptions, or I think that to some degree some of the gearing changes in Shadowlands fall into that category as well. Same thing with conduit energy, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more too. Apologize, there's a plane a little bit over. Jesus, it's loud. Wow. I hope it doesn't crash in my house. Anyway, so basically the way that I feel about this is that whenever I look at the situation and I see how things have gone,
He's got that sweet airport land, doesn't he? Yeah. Pretty nice. This is why he always wanted to go places. You see those jet planes flying overhead. One day I'm going to be like that. Be on my own flying mount in a digital world, going places. And that's how we have Asmongold.
I see the exact same pattern being repeated, and the Blizzard developers are disconnected from the community, and what they think players want is not what players want. And I think also many of the developers lack the insight to understand what players need. I think that there's a big difference between giving players what they want and giving players what they need. And I think the best example of really great game design that Blizzard has done, because I don't think that it's impossible.
This is going to be really interesting, because Asmongold is a really smart guy, and he's a very prolific player, very knowledgeable player, but he's not a game designer, right? He is the player, like in so many ways. But yeah. So for him to talk about the difference between what a player wants and what a player needs, this should be really interesting. I'm really curious to see what he says here.
I don't think these people are, to some degree, I do think that they're incompetent, I'll be honest. But to some other degree, I also think that...
Haven't been able to watch the streams recently, but have been enjoying all the YouTube content.
Thank you so much, Keyboard Cat, for the 6 months. Really appreciate it. I'm going to turn off notifications right now because I forgot to. All right. Sorry about timing. All good. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
They are just making mistakes. They're listening to the wrong people, and they don't have as close of a connection to the community as they used to. And an example of Blizzard making very great game design.
They actually have more connection to the community than they used to, right? We had very little. So that's an interesting statement. It might feel that they're more insular today, though. I can see why he could feel that way compared to, say, the last 4 expansions. If you go back to like Ghost Crawler days, maybe they felt like they were closer. And so maybe it did do sort of a bell curve, you know. And the insular thing could be a result as well of, like, again, the game design things that aren't resonating with them. You know what I mean? Like, maybe it's the same connection, but they're still doing a bunch of things that the players just aren't enjoying, so they feel like there's a bigger disconnection than there is. But yeah, that's interesting, because I talk about this a lot, like the distance between the community and the devs, right? Like, sometimes the devs aren't given enough space to do what they think needs to be done or is right for the game, because the community's always there, right? What was the analogy I came up with recently? Oh, it's like a brain surgeon, right? He's going to work on a patient, but he invites the whole family in to observe, right? And then right before he goes to work on the patient, he's like, hey everybody, where should I make the incision? Right? It's like, and the family's like, oh, well gosh, it's like, yeah, probably best if the family isn't here observing, you know, like, I got some work to do. It's really delicate. It's really difficult. And I'm going to try to get the patient out of here in good shape. Why don't you guys wait in the waiting room, wring your hands and whatever you need to do. But yeah, sometimes it's better to just leave the experts. Now we get to have the discussion on whether or not the guys running the show are experts. Whole other conversation, but you see what I'm saying. There used to be a trust, you know, like, generally speaking, there used to be a trust developed between the player base and the developers, and we could be more distant from each other, and you would still get a lot of, you know, good things and fun things. And, you know, some things have gone downhill, and so now, right, now there's more Karens popping up that want to see the manager, right, amongst the community. And so they sort of demand, you know, that the distance shrinks, right, between the two groups. But is the participation, you know, of the community going to improve the end result? Or, you know, that's kind of a crapshoot, right? So yeah, it's a tough one. Again, a really, really tough problem to solve. But at the end of the day, I think both communities are better served when really good, high quality game designers are working on the game, and players are just letting them do their thing and enjoying the content as it comes out, right? It seems like we're pretty far from that state of affairs, though.
Mine is the Awaken mod in Mythic Plus at the end of BFA. The reason why it was such a great mod is that it allowed you to completely change up the way that you did the dungeons. It totally revolutionized the role that rogues had in different dungeons, because before that, Veil of Shadows, or what was it called? The concealment thing that would make everybody else invisible and you could just skip packs, was just so meta-defining in Mythic Plus that almost every single high-end team had that. And whenever you had this affix added in, it completely invalidated that, and it made it much less important, and it added in a certain unique type of gameplay that was interesting in many different ways. And I think that the for example, the problem with Mythic Plus before then was that rogues were too powerful. And what players wanted was for Blizzard to nerf Shroud of Concealment, which was the rogue invisibility thing. I just couldn't think of it a minute ago. But what players needed was an alternate way to do dungeons. And the insight of a game developer, the insight of a great game developer, is to, in my opinion, take what players want and then discern from that what players need and then create that type of experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the Awakened mod was a great example of being able to do that. And I don't think that it's impossible for Blizzard to do this, but I do think that it's improbable.
That's a really good hit.
It certainly has been that way for a while. I think that oftentimes we'll see different types of things added into the game that are things that the players want exactly, and Blizzard just decides to give players what they want without actually thinking about why they want it. I think that another example of this is, I think that I might get into a little bit of hot water with this, but it's solo queue with PvP. I think that the truth is that, maybe Blizzard should add solo queue. I think so many people want it. Why don't we just add it and just see what happens, right? I think that'd be nice. But I don't think that's really going to solve any problems with PvP, because I think the core issue is the fact that there's no PvP community anymore. There's no shared space for PvPers to interact with each other with. And overall, it's just such a hollow experience from what being a PvPer used to mean back in Burning Crusade or Wrath of the Lich King or Cataclysm, or even Mists of Pandaria for that matter.
Is solo queue literally what it sounds like? You can queue as a solo and you're not doing a duel. You're being paired with other people? Paired or grouped or whatever with other people? Is that literally what solo queue means to people? Good God. Can you acknowledge? Yeah, he acknowledges it here, but can the player base at least identify how fucked the social experience is? If you're asking for this, right? You can't find one friend in the game to PvP with. Right? It's just, good God. Oh, good God. Sad. But yeah, he's absolutely right here. He's like, yeah, the problem isn't, well, the problem is tons of rewards are coming out of the PvP system. The social system is so damaged that nobody has anyone they can reliably, connect with to run queues together to get these rewards. And so they need a solo queue so that they can get these rewards. And yeah, the problems are so much more severe than that. So much more severe. Yikes.
And just over time, PvPers have become more disconnected from each other. PvPers have not been able to interact with each other in the same way. And that's led people to feel like they need solo queue because they don't have those spaces to interact with other players. And I think that's...
Even that dog in the background can't find a friend. You know what I mean? Poor doggo. Just wants a partner for PvP.
Probably at the very core of what a lot of these issues are, is Blizzard continues to treat symptoms and not diseases. And I think that that's one of the big issues that the development team has, is that because they're not playing the game the same way that their players are, that they don't have the insight into understanding why players are running into these problems, because the developers aren't running into them themselves, so they can't actually kind of break down what the behavior pattern is that led them to that point. And I think that's a huge issue. It really is. And another thing, I'll go back to corruptions, and another reason why I think this is the case is that the first week of 8.3, they nerfed Twilight Devastation.
That's an interesting comment. One of the reasons they can't see that the greater problem or the disease rather than the symptoms is because they don't run into these things themselves, right? But if they can't see them from where they're sitting, even without playing the game, then I hesitate to think they're going to be able to see them if they bump into them in-game. I think they're going to just see the symptoms in-game and still be like, oh, we got to attack the symptom here. Maybe solo queues are a good thing. I want to get rewards, right? Because yeah, it's definitely fairly obvious, and should be to a lot of the game designers, where this problem is, stemming from, right? As Asmongold has illustrated, that it's damage to the social environment.
By 50% in PvP. Now, you don't do a 50% nerf on an ability like that unless you just didn't test it and you didn't put any effort into figuring out if it was good or not. Like, there's no way you think, oh wow, this is going to be fine, and then you need to nerf it by 50%. Any normal person...
All right, that happened a couple of times in Vanilla's history. We just missed it, right? Does anyone remember the armor increase on Dire Bear form? Whoops. I'm going to go ahead and say that's our bad. Whoops. Whoopsie. Carry the one. Oh, whoops. I always forget some mundane detail. It's not mundane, Michael.
Person would think that, and I can almost guarantee you that there was feedback on the forums about that exactly. And I think that overall, Blizzard has become very fixated on throttling players and around creating a uniform experience for players to have. I think that Renown is a good example of that, where all players go through the same thing at the same time. And the reason why I'm using Renown as an example is I actually think that Renown is not that bad. The problem, in my opinion, lies in the implementation of it, and I think the cynicism that implementation creates in players. So I'll give you another example, is Anima. Right now, Anima is not really very fun to farm, and it doesn't really matter a whole lot. Most Anima things that you get are pretty much just cosmetics. They don't really matter a whole lot at all, but it's very clear that whenever Anima and Stygia 2 that was added into the mod, it's very clear that these two systems were not added into the game with a certain degree of insight into how players would enjoy them, and they were also clearly unfinished. And there were plenty of things that people had been asking for ever since the beginning of the alpha for Shadowlands that are just now happening with Anima, and just then happened with Stygia as well. And you have all these little minor examples, like people dying in the air with their character, and then they can't recover their Stygia, and GMs can't help them. Why is that? Why is this okay? Why are we not speaking out about clearly just incompetence and being ignored? It's ridiculous that this is even a consideration. There are games that are free to play that have better customer service than this. It's embarrassing. And I understand that things are hard. I understand that things like this are happening, and you have COVID, etc. But whenever I see Blizzard that fires 800 people, and then suddenly there's a bunch of customer service problems.
We're getting real now. So let's imagine a future where COVID isn't a thing anymore. You guys see Blizzard snapping back into shape? How many of you guys feel like customer service is going to be amazeballs right after COVID's done? Uh-oh. No confidence? What? You guys truly are cynics. Cynics!
Me as the player and also the consumer, I begin to wonder where their priorities are
also
at.
COVID done,
and
yeah.
It really does make me worried whenever I see them taking these shortcut solutions and selling themselves short. And I think that's also another thing that's happened. I think that Blizzard is so afraid of players finishing the game that they add in artificial throttling devices that will make it impossible for players to finish the game. I think that examples of this are just endless Anima grinds. I think it was the same thing with corruptions, and I'll give you an example with corruptions. I talked about this a lot, right? I streamed almost all of 8.3. I still never found a compelling argument for why the corruption vendor was on a rotation. Why was it on a rotation? And I don't mean to just talk about BFA, but again, I mean to establish a pattern. And I'll go ahead and do that now. why is conduit energy in the game? Why do we have conduit energy in the game right now? What purpose does this serve? Who is this helping? And I think Blizzard developers are solving problems that players don't have by using solutions that players don't want. And that's exactly what's happened for years now. And I'm tired of it. I'm exhausted whenever I play the game and I do all of my world quests, and 3 world quests in, I just want to go and I want to go watch a YouTube video or something like that. It's basically like, imagine every world quest, I spend 100% of my effort on the first one, then 70%, and then by the 4th or 5th world quest that I have to do for the anima or for these other different types of rewards that Blizzard has created, I'm barely even paying attention to the game. I'd rather, take a flight path that takes me 5 minutes so I can just not play the game than run.
Oh, God. Oh, ouch. Ouch. I want a longer flight path. Oh, that's so harsh. Wow. That is so rough. Yeah, okay, so some of you may not know that I hate rep grinds, right? As a designer, I don't particularly like them. And as a player, I can't stand them, right? Where you run around in circles killing the same thing over and over until you've killed 1,000,000 of them, and then you're at maximum rep and you get some reward for it, right? I've never done those in games. I have conceded that some people like that, right? That some people it's not that they're willing to do them, it's that they like that sense of certainty. They like the sense of like, this is a relatively low skill thing that I can grind out to get purples or cosmetics or whatever it is that doesn't require, it's something I can do solo. It's something I can, I don't need a lot of skill or teamwork or all the things that like high-end raids might require, right? And so I concede that they're worth putting in the game, right? For that group of players, right? Because there is a sizable number of people that don't mind rep grinds and, actually enjoy, right? To some extent. I don't understand it, but I appreciate it. And so it was something I was like, yeah, okay, we'll put some rep grinds in. What really saddens me is that retail has like essentially a rep grind in all of their systems now. Anima, Soul Ash. There's just so many, Stygian, I don't even know what all the resources are. But it just sounds like you get to max level, you find out there's all these different resource bars you have to fill, and you go and repeat content until they're all, maximized each week, and then you can take a breather, and then you come back the next week and refill the bars all again. And it's sad to me that like so much of the systems is based around the rep grind sort of model, as opposed to that being over here, as one possible way of getting some gear. But then there's a bunch of other ways. You can be PvPer, you can be a high-end raider, you can be a crafter, like there's different ways, and those things still exist, but it still seems like there's a rep grind type model underneath all of those things, right? It started with tokens, right, in raiding, and now it's just straight up like, like resources or bars that you're filling, right? And it's sad. There's too much of that stuff. It's too exhausting, and this is exactly what it leads to. It leads to exhaustion, right? And that's what Asmongold's feeling right now, and what a lot of people are feeling. Just that burnout, and that burnout comes quicker and quicker with each expansion, and you'll notice that in the like curves you see on subs, it's just like massive hype, and then that angle gets more acute, right? Between start of expansion and everybody vacating, much quicker with each expansion as burnout occurs. Just a lot quicker with each passing cycle. Anyway, but I hate to see the exhaustion on the super fan. You know what I mean? It's really rough.
30 seconds. And I think it's just a very unfortunate situation that Blizzard has trained players into not playing the game and into waiting for later patches for systems that are, in my opinion, intentionally flawed to be fixed because of some sort of arbitrary time reason. And what I mean by that is that I think Blizzard, and this is probably maybe a conspiracy theory, but I think it's true. I think that Blizzard intentionally releases systems into the game that are unfinished and that are hard to use. And then they use the fixing of those systems as a reason later on to artificially increase engagement of those systems later on. And what I think this really does is it creates a pattern and a cycle of cynicism within the players, because people are tired of just being fed shit and then be expected to wait 4 months for it to actually not be shit. I don't really know why people are not asking for these things to be removed immediately, asking for these things. I don't want to wait for 9.1. I don't want to wait for 9.2 for obvious functional game changes to occur. And I'll give you kind of another example of this happening in BFA, because I think BFA, the reason I'm using that as an example for many of these things is that...
Yeah, it's definitely... once again, it's like you have to assume malice or incompetence. Which one are you going with? Do they not know how to put out good systems? Or are they intentionally, manipulating? Either way, you're not in a good spot. It's a rough place. Both. You don't think they're evil? Yeah, I don't either. Like, I have a real hard time with that one just because, most people, especially in the games industry, like, if everyone on the dev team was sort of like miniature versions of Bobby Kotick, like they were just making bundles, right, of money, just bundles of money, then you could make an argument that they just don't give a shit, right? But I'm willing to bet they're not making so much money that they don't care about their reputation, right? They don't care about, their CV, as it were, where it's just like, oh, you worked on Shadowlands. Interesting. You want to work here now? Huh. Right? Or you walk down the street, to get some lunch and you're wearing a Shadowlands shirt. And everyone's like, oh, you work at Blizzard? And you're just like, so that's why I have a hard time with, the intentional malice, is because I think that they want to be attached to something amazing. They want to be attached to one of the greatest games of all time. They want players to love it and be appreciative and respect the job you do. They want to be able to hold their heads up, So I definitely believe that for a lot of them, their heart is in the right place. It could be a systemic thing, like obviously there's all those theories, but I have a real hard time believing in intentionally putting out a terrible version of a thing just because it doesn't ring true for me.
BFA is a full expansion cycle that these things have occurred in. And I think another example of this is Azerite armor. I don't think anybody appreciated having to hold 3 or 4 helmets in their inventory because Blizzard thought having spec-specific Azerite armor was stupid for the entire expansion. Let me ask you, now that BFA is over, did having 3 helmets and 4 different pairs of shoulders in your inventory for the entire expansion give you a better experience? Because the answer in my mind is absolutely not. It was annoying and it was stupid.
Not sure I agree here. Because this is speaking of some classic or vanilla itemization. Needed different helmets for different jobs, and it made the chase for different things interesting. It created identity for people that didn't want to chase. They were only the one thing because they didn't have the gear to do the other things. There's lots of complaints about Azurite, don't get me wrong, but I don't think this is one of them. I don't necessarily think this is a good one.
And it made you have to pick and choose, with there being no upside whatsoever. There was really no positive about it. And I remember Ian was talking about how the Azurite respec cost was too much because it kept doubling infinitely. And I got really mad about that statement. And the reason why I got mad about that statement is because Ian is the game director. Ian could just go in and change it if he wanted to. Now, obviously, Blizzard is probably getting into the point where they are, instead of too big to fail, they're too big to succeed. You'd probably have to go through 8 different board meetings in order to decide where to change a variable in one minor feature in the game. But the truth is that that's a problem in itself. Blizzard is not agile with changes. Blizzard is not able to fix these things in a timely manner that makes players feel like their time is being respected. And I'm sorry, but whenever I'm sitting there doing Torghast 2 times a week, why do I have to do Torghast 2 times a week? Why is 1 time for all of my Soul Ash not enough? Why do I have to repeat, really, I mean, let's be honest, the exact same content twice? Why are these different types of systems, like Renown, especially for same Covenant characters, why are these systems not account-wide? Nobody levels up a character to do World Quest twice. People level up a character generally to do some of the core in-game features. People do not want to fill up the bar of this basically World Quest counter of reputation multiple times on different characters. I genuinely do not think that's normal player.
They tend not to do it on one character, not want to do it on one character, much less 2 characters.
Behavior, even though Ian insists that it is, because I've never spoken to a person who's like that. And I actually just think that he's wrong, because he's talking about how conduit energy is useful, and he explained how it's a good idea to have the corruption vendor on a rotation. I actually don't think there's a huge amount of people that think that. I don't think there's a huge amount of people that do that. I think that he's wrong, because that's the things that he's been wrong with before. There are very few things that Ian has been right about that have actually had to do with player behavior. I think that Ian is a great raid designer. The raids that he was in charge of designing, I think, were some of the greatest raids of all time. And I think that the endgame PvE experience, Castle Nathria, seems to be a very, very good raid. And I do also want to say, at the very high levels of raiding and PvP, truthfully, my opinion doesn't really mean shit. I haven't raided or PvP'd very seriously for a very long time. So I'd defer to somebody else who has more knowledge, but I think that many other people who do seem to share the same sentiment, especially with raids. I think that across many of the high-end raiders that I've spoken to, many of them have said multiple times that one thing that Blizzard has not, dropped the ball on is raids. And I'm really glad to see that. But I think that one blind spot that Ian and the WoW team in general has is understanding how different changes and different systems make players feel. And I think this is a huge issue, because I think that so often they design content with the way the game should be played, and then they don't iterate on that content based off of how the game is being played. And that's led players to, I think, have a lot of resentment towards the game and be very...
Also, the first part of that is just really bad starting point. Designers setting out to create a thing where there's an intentional design, an over-design. Players should play this way. We've designed it so that they would play a certain way. That's a really bad framework, because then you've already established that you're in an adversarial relationship with your player base. Because if they're not going to do that, they're going to do something else. Now you're like, well, what do we do now? They were supposed to be like this. They were supposed to run the maze for the, like the rats they are, to get through to get the cheese, and they're jumping over the walls. What do? We got to make the walls higher. Shit. So, really bad starting point. I don't even know that that's true necessarily, but it's definitely believable that that's what they set out to do.
Very frustrated about how the game is basically not catering to them and not creating a fulfilling experience. Because I think that's fundamentally what it is. People play video games, in my opinion, to feel good to some degree or to distract themselves. And I think that, and maybe this is just me projecting, but I think there's a lot of people who, the moment that I play a video game and I feel like I'm wasting my time, I stop playing a video game. I just stop playing the game. Like, that's it. I like the illusion is broken. It's like I'll try to think of like an analogy. I don't know. It's like whenever Gandalf fucking purged Saruman's influence from King Theoden and Rohan in Lord of the Rings. Okay, a bit of a nerd reference, but I think that you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. If you know what I'm talking about, is that
love it.
It will immediately snap you out of that feeling of enjoying the game, and you'll go from I'm loving this to I'm hating this in just a matter of minutes, and it will create apathy. It will create resentment, and you'll just move on and stop playing the game. And I think that so many systems in the game end up creating that because Blizzard is more focused on how players should feel rather than how players do feel. And
that's also, I talk a lot about addiction versus passion. And yeah, if you're setting out to create an addiction mechanism, then people are going to wash out really upset, But if you set out to create a passion mechanism, people are going to be excited to do it. And then when sort of the passion fades over time, which can certainly happen, you're probably gonna leave satisfied, but just not thrilled anymore, right? So huge difference on the end game. But the thing about brain science is, right? It's much easier to get people addicted to things than excited about things. So it's a much trickier task, to design a game that does, the passion maneuver rather than the addiction maneuver.
Too much content in the game is being developed without the insight of somebody who understands the psychology of the players, and I think that's evident by the amount of systems that have been added in that have, if anything, just encouraged apathy in the game. Anima, the corruption system, the Azerite system, the Legion Legendary system, and I can go on probably and think of more as well. And I think at a certain point, it's very tiring. And for me, as I've played the game for a long time, there are a lot of these like little, very small, minor things that I don't really think anybody cares about except for like me. So like a small thing is that in all the Shadowlands rares, the rares only drop their unique item if you're killing them with the correct spec or you're killing them with the correct class. So for example, if I'm trying to farm a rogue dagger off of a rare in Bastion, I have to be a rogue in order to farm that, or maybe a feral druid can equip it, or a hunter or something like that. But overall, you have to be that specialization. Why is that? Why is it not that you can just kill them and have the item drop because it's for transmog anyway and nobody's going to realistically use it? And these types of changes and just these little small design flaws in my mind just go to show, and they become evident of a larger problem of a disconnect between the players and the developers being able to accurately understand and create content that's fulfilling for players. I think that's one of the biggest issues that the game has, is that it's just simply not fulfilling. And I think that Castle Nathria is a very good example of that. I know that my guild has had a lot of trouble with that, and I've heard from a lot of other guilds too that the raid is just simply not worth the trouble. And I don't really know exactly what the solution for that is. Is it just make the best absolute gear in the world drop from the raid? I don't know. In a way, I think that might be the solution, but in a way, not. It's the same thing with Mythic Plus. I feel like Mythic Plus hasn't really been innovated a lot ever since Legion. I think that Blizzard has taken the safest approach possible with Mythic Plus and also with Arena and PvP competitive in general, because I think that the advent of the MDI and the AWC has actually caused the competitive elements of the game to stagnate because Blizzard doesn't want to take a risk on imbalances. And I think that, for example, we don't really see RBGs being innovated at all. We don't really see any sort of interesting keys occurring at all. It's just the same boring 2 affixes with the seasonal affix. It was a great idea. I'll give them credit for that. It was a great idea. But you need more than that. And I think especially for average players, you need something to really get people excited. And I think that's what really the issue is that there's just not a whole lot of things in the game that get you excited. Now, is this something that's the case because I've played the game for 15 years and it's harder to excite me now than it was whenever I was in high school and 16 years old? I think that's a factor, but I think that also whenever I see, for example, the armor from the Chains of Domination patch, the plate Mythic Maw armor, that motivates me to want a Mythic Raid. And it's the same exact feeling I got back whenever I saw the Blackrock Foundry Mythic Raid armor for Warriors, the Iron Star, like red and black armor. I thought to myself, you know what, guys? I was thinking about skipping out on the raid this tier, but turns out old Asmongold, maybe it's down for another round. And I think...
The important point I'm picking out here is if the experience isn't good enough, right, and the reward structure is what's motivating you to do the thing, the pleasure you're going to get from the reward structure is going to shrink over time, right, compared to the experience. So if the experience isn't carrying, right, the experience is kind of static and you're sort of over it, but the reward structure is what makes you do it. Like look at his eyes light up at the idea of reward structure, right? Each time, that hit's going to be a little bit less, right? Because you're not having that great a time. So the payout, every time you get to the payout, your brain thinks back, was this worth it, right? I did all this stuff that wasn't that fun, or was a certain amount of fun. Was it worth it? And more, your brain is returning smaller numbers. It was worth it 10, now it's worth it 9, now it's worth it 8, 7, 6, right? Some of that is an element of time, but it's also just the experience, right? The experience has to be fresh. It has to be new. It has to feel like something you're discovering and figuring out, and it has to engage you. It has to be challenging, right? And it's hitting some of those, marks, but that's what keeps you in the game. And then every time you get the reward back, your brain is kind of like, oh, that's nice, but that's not why I'm here. Like, you're here for this, right? And look at other games that you've enjoyed and are dying for another version of, right? Anybody want another Dark Souls game, right? Like, is it because the reward structure was amazing? Or is it because the experience was amazing? You know what I mean? So, yeah, they have to get back to good old-fashioned, honest experience, gameplay, and design being the thing that keeps you in there, right?
I think that it's not just because I'm older or I'm jaded or anything like that. I think that there's actually a lack of innovative and interesting and inspired content. And I think that lack of innovative and inspired and interesting content comes from a disconnect between the developers and the players, a fixation on trying to make players play a certain way and preventing certain play styles from occurring. And so often it feels like it's the developers against the players, and the development of the game is often an adversarial relationship between the people that want the game to be fun and the developers that want to throttle the game for whatever reason. And I think the two examples of that kind of that tug of war is Conduit Energy right now, and then previously the rotation on the corruption vendor. So I see these things happen. I see people continuously become more apathetic about the game, and I see Ian come on and interview with Preach, and I do want to say again, I really appreciate Ian coming on and talking about it, and that's why I've tried to be as direct and just honest as possible in this video, because this is just my genuine feedback. This is really just how the game makes me feel. And I think that we need more of this. I think that we need more of these interviews. We need more of these conversations, because the truth is that I love WoW. I've loved WoW for 15 years. This little hat here is from WoW. I think it's actually from Hearthstone, but you know, Hearthstone is from WoW, so it is what it is. And ultimately, I really care about this game a lot, and I want to see it do better. Obviously, there are other games I'm excited for, other games that I care about, but WoW is always going to be the game that I love. And I hate to see it go down this route, and I don't think that it has to. I think that a lot of times that we can expect better, and I think that we should.
Mm-hmm.
We shouldn't expect to play with a bad system for the rest.
Yeah, keep demanding better. Absolutely.
Rest of the expansion. We shouldn't expect to play with a bad system for the rest of a patch. People should want changes immediately if those changes impact the way they enjoy the game. And I think that Ian has almost a defeatist attitude around that. That, oh, well, we can't change this, you know, this is an expansion thing or whatever. Who cares? Well, like, these are your own rules that you've created. Nobody else has these rules. This is something that's completely fabricated. This is in your head. And I think that more players need to wake up and see that, and we need to ask for and expect better, because I know Blizzard can do it. I know that they can make better content, and I think that there have been many cases, even recently, of them being able to do that. I think Shadowlands is a massive improvement over BFA in 100 different ways. And there are some things that I like better about BFA, but that's a handful, and there's hundreds that I like better about Shadowlands. Let's keep asking for better content, and let's keep expecting better content. I don't want to wait until the next expansion or the next patch to be able to enjoy the game. I want to enjoy it now. Anyway, guys, that's pretty much how I feel, and that's pretty much it. Really hope the game gets better. I'm going to probably go inside and farm anima for 15 minutes and then watch a YouTube video because I get bored. Peace.
Oh. It's a bit annoying, this. We've been
a little bit of kickoff there. There you have it. Thanks very much for watching. I like that video a lot because I don't always agree with Asmongold and the implementations of what he's talking about, but his heart is always in the right place. You know what I mean? He wants the game to be better so he can play it and enjoy it as he has for so many years, and I think a lot of other people are in that same boat. So but yeah, he's not a game designer, right? So not only do I not always agree with what he thinks is right for the game going forward, but more importantly, it's not his place, you know? It's not his place to fix the game. It's his place to enjoy it and be an advocate for the passion, you know, of playing the game and loving the game and enjoying the game. And it's the job of the developers to make the game something he wants to, you know, he wants to play and love and enjoy. So, and yeah, I couldn't agree more that I don't think the current dev team, and particularly the leadership, is in a good position to deliver on that promise, on that hope, on that brighter future. So, yeah, but great video. Great stuff from Asmongold. Thanks very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Please take that like video out for a nice, you know, dollar menu. treat at the old Mickey D's. And we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.